each and every one of these people are architects of change, and whenever we have an architect of change conversation, we ask people to make several commitments. We're not going to go through them tonight because I know everybody's been here a long time, but the first one is, I think, one of the most important, and it's to attend this conversation with an open mind and an open heart and without judgment, because that's the way I think we all learn, we all grow, and we all change. So I hope this is a big divide, this conversation, but we're going to bring it down to the theater, we're going to bring it down to our kitchen tables, and we're going to bring it down to each and every one of us. So I want to thank you, and I want to start with you, because you heard the word Sandy Hook in the play, the narrative, as Debbie calls it, and you have been out using your voice, keeping your son's memory alive, and using your voice so that no other person has to go through what you went through. Tell everybody here, if you could, Nicole, what each of us can do to start with ourselves to bring this conversation to a different level.
Well, I think that the most important thing is that far too many people feel that this is a hopeless and helpless issue, and that there's nothing that can be done. So they disengage, or they feel it's someone else's problem to deal with. So I would say that the most important thing is to get engaged, and that, like you said, that can start in a conversation at your kitchen table, it can start in your schools, it can start in community. It's a lot about behaviors and attitudes and not accepting this as normal, because gun violence is not normal and it's preventable. And what we teach a lot, and which I would urge everyone to learn about what they can do in their own home, is about how to know the signs of someone who needs help, who's in trouble and needs help, and connect with them to get the help that they need, so that they don't go on to make bad decisions that end up hurting someone else or themselves.
Nicole was saying to me that we're all very well acquainted now with what might look like a stroke, or what heart disease looks like, or what cancer is, and that really you're trying to get people to notice these issues when it comes to gun violence. And you're urging particularly kids also in school, if they notice a kid who's isolated, to reach out to say hello.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a program called Start With Hello, which, you know, it's just so important to make connections, because sometimes if someone who is very isolated, they can further withdraw, seek like-minded people elsewhere that might not be very healthy relationships for them. So noticing someone, reaching out, that's important. And also teaching our kids. There was, you know, a lot of it, a piece in the narrative talked about technology, and I thought that was really interesting, because teaching our kids that they have the power to see things on social media in particular that adults might not see, and say, you know, you can say something and you can prevent tragedies from happening. And that's another big training that we do out in schools, is teaching kids what are those signs and signals, how can you see them, and how do you tell a trusted adult or make an intervention of some kind.
Marcus, a lot of what she's saying is to have a different approach, to treat this, as she said, like cancer,
yes,
like a stroke. Notice the signs. You're trying to get people to look at violence in a holistic way as a health issue. How is that approach working, and how can we all learn more about it?
Yes, well, the approach is working very well. It's as Maria mentioned, I work for an organization called Cure Violence, founded by an epidemiologist by the name of Dr. Gary Sluckin. And we look at violence from a health lens, and we try to interrupt and detect when violence may happen. We're dealing mostly with inner city gun violence, but we're branching out into more types of violence. But we try to interrupt and detect when violence may occur, change the behaviors associated with that violence, and then change the community norms. And we've seen tremendous success in the areas where we've implemented the model.
You talk about working in neighborhoods where kids are exposed to violence at a very early age, and I was particularly struck by Jimmy tonight, who said, you know, all he heard was no, 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 and how his kind of life led him into a very different life. Do you feel that there's hope for kids like Jimmy?
Most definitely. I mean, I deal with kids like Jimmy quite a bit, and at some point in my life, I was Jimmy.
So tell your story.
Yeah, so, you know, myself, I'm originally born here in California, born in LA, raised from here to Chicago, back and forth all my life. My mom and dad were divorced. And so I wind up finding myself in between parents, out in the streets, into gang activity and wind up doing 10 years incarceration. And so since I've been doing this work for the last 12, 13 years, not only have it allowed me to try to change a young man's life, it's actually changed my life for the good. I mean, I never thought I'd be here sitting in front of this crowd talking about what we're talking about today.
Was there one thing that somebody did for you, said to you, noticed in you, that changed you?
Quite a bit. My grandfather, who's deceased now, and when I came home, you know, and I was starting off fresh, and I got locked up when I was 18, didn't come home until I was 27. And my grandfather, who meant a lot to me, basically just told me to take it one day at a time, you know, don't try to build Rome in a day. And he just said, you know, enjoy your freedom and just get back acclimated. And he really believed in me. And I wish he could have seen where I'm at today doing the work I do. It would have meant so much to me for him to see how I did take his advice and change my life for the best.
Debbie, you and I were talking before about why you decided to do this narrative. And I said that really everybody on this stage but you has actually experienced gun violence in their family. And you said that and I asked you, because so many people say people don't get involved in this unless it hits home or it hits them in their own family. What hit you that you went and wrote this and has made it such passion?
Well, I'm from Texas, where there's a lot of guns. I grew up in a time where I was totally compromised just because of racial segregation. I saw violence that I can't even begin to describe. As a child, I saw things that happened to people just because they were black. Then as I grew up, and the arts really helped me rise above all of those fears as a child, or what I thought could be my boundaries. The arts helped me live to where I saw myself. And I came here to Los Angeles to do fame, and I just couldn't ever become desensitized to the daily deaths, murders, gang, police violence. It was just too awful. And every time I would hear about a child, it was as if it were my own. I did feel that it was my own, because I don't know, somehow I've been raised by my mother, Vivian Ayers, as a child of the universe. And in this universe, we are all connected. And there is no separation. We are connected. And, I guess it takes a tsunami in Japan for us to realize that what happens over there will affect us over here. And so I was so motivated, and especially after the death of a particular child. There was a baby in a stroller caught in a crossfire. And I just imagined myself as one of the mothers or the family members, and I played it out. And so I started writing it as a movie, but then, as I grew and developed a lot of theater, more experience, I felt this was great, and I had the opportunity to do it in Australia, where they don't have guns, where guns are illegal. And I was not sure if they would be open to this piece, but they actually loved it a lot. And I've worked on it since then, and it's, I think, more relevant than ever, unfortunately. Yeah. And I keep having to rewrite it because I have to keep updating it. I mean, I woke up with that melody in my mind, the ghost of Columbine and Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook tore my heart apart. It just broke my heart. And we just have to do something. And if we change a few people, just in the research in doing this, I actually met and befriended a lot of gang people. The Jimmy character, I know a young boy. And it was really very challenging to meet Anthony, because he'd come to the dance studio every day, and I let him because I wasn't afraid that he would do anything, because he said, "Oh, Mr. Allen, I wish you had found me when I was 9 or 10 years old. I would like to have learned to tap dance." And so I know that the arts is a way, and I know that kids don't have opportunity, and I know that if I'm anything, I'm a children's rights activist in terms of what their education is. It can't just be math and science. They need the arts. Steve Jobs didn't become Steve Jobs without being creative. No one can even find the cure to cancer without being creative and having imagination. And there's nothing like the arts that will keep America strong and in the forefront in leadership in the world. And we're talking about creativity. So here we are.
In the play, we see in the narrative, we see the narrative from so many different angles. And Bernard, we see it from the angle of the police. And the first time we see the police on stage, we see the officer saying, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? And I know when you were the chief of police here, you worked hard on gun control, and then you had violence impact your own family, losing your granddaughter. And help us understand what goes through the mind of people who are in the police, because they are people, men and women. How can we bridge the divide between the police, between neighborhoods, and on behalf of families?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the play you put together. But let me just say this, I've only studied this for 50 years. And I think the dilemma that we all run into is that the problem sometimes is so overwhelming, we don't know where to get started. And the most simple answer that I have about our youth is if we train and educate our children and have healthy, educated children, we'll solve most of our problems. The other issue is that we have lost over the decades many, many years of activism. We have seen over the last several years that people are willing to show up and burn up a part of their town over a police shooting, but they are silent and invisible on a community-to-community homicide, which is significantly higher than police on citizen homicide. I think the issue of the police, and this has concerned me over the time, is that, and I may be in a generation gap here, but as a police officer all the way up to chief of police, my perception was we hire police officers to do a job. No one expects them to sacrifice themselves, but it was not something that was so overwhelming as you hear today where police officers are saying, I want to go home tonight. No one asked them not to go home. And if you go back and look at many of the incidents that come before us, a large part of them are based on poor tactics and putting themselves in more dangerous situations than they should. But at the moment of truth, you cannot expect them to say, I'm not going to defend myself, even though I may have gotten 2 feet closer to the person than I should have. And I think in our community, you hear it all the time, that people want to give their child to the police as opposed to the parents and neighborhoods raising their kids. The police are hired in the sense of dealing with things often after the fact. They're very minimal operations on prevention. And just as we saw the young man Jimmy in the play, just remember there's literally hundreds of thousands of anti-Jimmys that are getting no attention. And if we keep ignoring them, and as a parent called me several years ago when the city announced that they had a gang czar and they were going to do all these programs for gang members, the parent called and said, does my kid have to join a gang to get access to the services? So we can't forget there's a lot of kids that find their way on this stage to perform and to do a lot of things that are not criminals, have not been exposed to criminal activity, find their way to weave through a neighborhood and not be a gang member, but know how to survive. And we need to make sure we support them also. And we need to ensure that if we're not voting, if we're not at the Crenshaw High School parent meeting, if we're not at the things that are important to our kids, we can't just be offended when the most horrible thing comes before us. I experienced a situation at Crenshaw that came to mind when I looked at the tape. Crenshaw High was notified that they were decertified as an educational institution. And the meeting that they had with the parents, 500 people showed up in the gymnasium, screaming, hollering, tears in their eyes, snot coming out of their nose. A week later, when they were certified, 15 people showed up at the next parent meeting. That gives you an indication that we often wait till the problem is too large, or we wait for the most visible symbol of something going wrong, as opposed to taking our time and dealing with incremental steps to make things better. And you're not going to, when you hear people on TV say, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? That's a problem that's overwhelming. Nobody has the answer for that. But the issue is, how can you take care of put yourself in order, get your house in order, get your block in order, get your neighborhood in order, keep your schools productive, educating your kids. That is a job everyone can participate in. And even if you don't have kids in school, doesn't mean you can't participate in the education of your neighborhood children. I coached Pop Warner football for 10 years. Never had a child go through the program. But I got a chance to meet Warren Moon as an 11-year-old. I got a chance to meet many of these young kids that are lawyers, doctors, business people that all came through Baldwin Hills youth football because people had a willingness to work with the anti-Jimmy, to where they kept the young people on the straight and narrow. They gave them activities and basically babysat them for 6 months out of the year while their parents were at work and a variety of things. That's what the whole issue in our neighborhood that we have to deal with. And my final point is, when you deal with poor neighborhoods, it's very difficult to discuss physical health problems with families. It's impossible to discuss mental health. There are so many stigmas on mental health. And to give you an idea how far our system has deteriorated, our LA County Jail dispenses more medication for mental illness than any hospital in the state of California. The county jail of Los Angeles dispenses more medication for mental illness than any facility in the state of California.
Chief, if everybody could look at their program, we have, because everybody thinks it's a problem that they can't have anything to do with, we have given, after talking to a lot of people who work in this space, 5 things that really each and every person can leave here tonight by doing. And the chief talked a lot about parenting, and Nicole talked about saying hello, but one of the starting points, I think, that everybody has said is to start with yourself, to look at your relationship with violence. Begin a conversation at your own kitchen table. Think about how you're talking in your own home. How are you raising your children, right? What kind of media are you consuming? When I spoke to the chief of police, Chief Beck here, he said, you know, we have a new football team coming. That's going to increase violence in neighborhoods here in Los Angeles. We have to get them involved in stopping violence in our neighborhood. One of the other things we talk about is bridging the divide. Nicole, you talked about asking people to reach out and say something, to reach out to another family. If families in the neighborhood notice something, go and talk to them. How difficult is that to do?
I think people think it's more difficult than it actually is, in all honesty. In a neighborhood, you don't always know all of your neighbors, but to go out and just say hello to them, wave, smile, that takes no effort whatsoever. And just to know that someone else is out there watching out for you, caring in any way, that can make a significant difference.
Would that have made any difference in Sandy Hook?
Oh, you know, there were a lot of dominoes that lined up very perfectly that day for what happened to happen. But one of my friends, David Wheeler, who also lost his son that day, says, you know, when he thinks about the dominoes, all he sees are the spaces in between where someone could have intervened, someone could have done something, and it would have stopped the next domino from falling over. And that's I think, critical, looking for those spaces to make a difference.
Mark is one of the other, one of the other things that we found out is people were saying that, you know, people who are on the anti-gun side and the gun side never talk. No one reaches out because the gun people are like, oh, we don't want to talk to the people who are on the anti-gun side. They think we're bad. We think they want to take our guns. How difficult is it to bridge the divide, to have the conversation between that kid that's in the gang, or that kid who's violent, or that person who owns a gun?
Well, with regards to that kid, you know, in the inner city, for us as an organization, it's not that hard for us to have that conversation with that side of the spectrum, because the individuals that we hire are from the neighborhood, and we like to say that they were once infected themselves and they become the antidote. See, we believe in a lot of antidote being pushed in the neighborhood from individuals that they can relate to, that might have overcame the same barriers that they have, and we found it to be very, very, very effective, because a young man or a young lady or just anyone for nature is going to gravitate towards someone that they can relate to. And so that discussion with that side of the spectrum has been kind of easy for us with regards to those, you know, on the gun side of things. So one thing about Cure Violence, you know, we don't look at things as a good or bad thing or a moral issue, or do you have guns or should you not have guns. Our whole thing, and it makes sense because a doctor is our founder, is that we're looking for solutions. You know, we don't want to keep talking about all the things that lead up to it or what. We want to find out what can we do right now to eradicate the gun violence without finding ourselves being in the middle and battling against the NRA or battling against those that don't want to keep their guns.
You said talk to a young man or a young lady.
Yes.
Is one of the big elephants in the room, we talked a little bit about mental health, but is it men? So many of these cases, mass shootings, involve young men. Mm-hmm. And what is going on with young men that we should all know about, do better with? How do we reach our men?
Well, once again, and I'm going to speak to my specific expertise, and mine would be with African American young men in the neighborhoods that I'm primarily service. And, you know, we're dealing with young men that don't have a father, don't have, and we've heard this, many of us in this room, that don't have the support system that they need. And in some cases, you know, the gang atmosphere becomes their support. And so, you know, we look at violence as learned behavior. So we're trying to change what they're learning. And so if they see a young man marching in the streets of Chicago, or either it's here in LA, who used to be, as I say, violent himself, and a young kid sees him out there and everyone in the neighborhood knows what he used to be about, and now you see him really sincere marching with a banner that says stop shooting, stop killing, we want that to be infectious in the reverse role, where the learned behavior is, the violent part of it is unlearned. And so that's primarily, you know, how we would deal with those situations.
Debbie, one of the other points that we have is obviously to be informed, to care. You said you could not be desensitized, and so many people I talk to who watch the news say, like, there it goes again, there it goes again. I just can't even pay any more attention because every time I turn on the news, there it is again. How do we, you know, you said desensitize. You don't want to be desensitized, but people are. How do we get them to wake up and pay attention before they end up in a situation like Nicole?
That's a very challenging question and an answer I'm not sure I know. I only know what I can do. I think that this production freeze frame made you all feel something, yes? Yes. And it made you see inside the ideas or some thoughts that people had that maybe you didn't know. You might have learned something. I did a lot of study to do this, so I don't know if there is a concise answer. You know, I'm tending to look at where we are and just feel that we have somehow lost our moral spine. We've kind of lost our moral spine, and that everything is okay. You know, it's just like the internet is supposed to be so free, free, free. Everyone can say what they want to say, but they're having to pull it back now because we have people doing very bad things We have things, I understand they just stopped selling guns on Facebook.
Right.
I mean, because they don't want that to happen. But that was part of the deal. Let it be free.
But that was a lot of pressure from individuals, from family organizations that forced that move, which shows the power. Once again, bringing back, individuals do have power. That's what forced and changed Facebook, or family groups.
Sometimes you need that one person to stand up and say something that might be difficult, that will change the whole room, change the city, change the nation. We experienced this in Hollywood just recently. Jada Pinkett Smith stood up and said something that changed a lot of things. And you have to have courage. You have to have courage and you have to have belief. But I think somehow we've got to find a moral